ladies and gentlemen, please give a big Detroit welcome to Patricia Wheeler.
Dad sat on the front porch of my folks' house in Farmington, Michigan. He had just finished eating a BLT, was reading a book, had a brain aneurysm, and died. BLT, book, brain aneurysm, those are the three things that I remember from that July 3 years ago, and one of them is not like the other. We congregate in the backyard 2 days later, all of his family and friends, and we share stories of all of the trouble that we got into with him. And Dad was one of those suck the marrow out of life kind of guys. So there was a lot of trouble to talk about. Uncle Gardo and Gary, who are two of Dad's oldest and dearest friends, told us story after story about countless nights spent at the Granby Ballroom, which was just down the road from here in Detroit, spending as much time as they could a part of this rock and roll scene, sucking in everything it was to be a part of that in Detroit in the 70s. And we were sitting around this picnic table that I had bought for Dad a couple of Father's Days earlier when Gary said, "Hey, Gardo, do you remember that Who show?" And Gardo said, "How could I forget?" Gary said, "Patty, this was when your dad went to Ferris, which you know is 3 hours away on the other side of the state, and it was the winter. And I was backstage at the Grandy talking to Alice Cooper when I got this weird feeling, and so I went to the stage door, and I opened the door, and there, in the alley, in the darkness, was your dad. He had hitchhiked across the state in the snow because he could not miss that show. You see, this was the first time that a band was syncing lights up with their music, which now seems like a common thing, maybe even an expectation, but at that point was brand new. Gardo said, "I was running the lights that night, and I was back at the back of the theater in the light booth, and I saw this figure walking toward me. And I said, 'Weiss?'" They all called my dad Weiss. "Hey, Gardo," your dad said back. He was wearing this pea coat and carrying a tweed suitcase, and I asked him, "What's in the bag, Weiss?" And your dad, he looked at me, and without missing a beat, he said, "Everything I need, man." It was the 70s. It was 1986, and we were in our beige Ford Taurus station wagon. And station wagons back in those days, you could really cram kids into them. This one even had one of those seats in the trunk that faced out the back. And I know why they're not still around, but damn, I wish I had one. But that day, August 6th, 1986, that day it was just me and Dad in the car. And we were driving down the expressway, and knowing him, the windows were down, maybe because he was smoking his Newports one after another. But definitely because he loved the way that fast air felt on his face. And we lived in Pinckney then, and we had just moved from the suburbs to this place where there were no stoplights and more lakes than you can count. My brother had been born, and so we headed out that way. And Dad and I, we spent a fair amount of time alone together before Eddie was born because Mom worked midnights, but this was different. You see, we were heading north on 23 to this place that I didn't know yet, but that I would learn to love as much as Dad did. We were going to Pine Knob. And Pine Knob is one of those places that you can use kind of as a barometer to see if people are really from here. Even though they changed their name 17 years ago, those of us in the know, we will always call it Pine Knob. And so Dad and I, we were alone on this trip, and even though we spent time alone together, this was special because we were going out. We were going to see the Monkees. They were my favorite band. I had all of their cassettes. I watched every single rerun of their show on MTV. And my dad, he loved live music as much as he loved anything. And this was a special show because this was their 20th anniversary reunion tour, which I guess means 20 years after they broke up. And in the end, it turned out that the two shows that they played at Pine Knob were the highest grossing of their entire tour, but that night it didn't matter. That night, all that mattered was me. So we're driving on 23, just before we turn off to get a little bit closer to that rock and roll, and Dad turns around and looks at me in the back seat of the Taurus, and he says, "You know, Patty, this is kind of like your first date." I was 4. I looked at him and I said in my most serious tone, "It's not that big a deal, Dad." Except it totally was. Dad loved live music as much as he loved anything. And he loved being a dad. So for him to get to take me to my first concert, that meant as much to him as it did to me. I still have my t-shirt from that night. It must have been a dress at that point. The giant monkey symbol in the middle, Gary Puckett in the Union Gap, and Herman's Hermits below. I keep it in this box that's underneath my bed that has a bunch of stuff in it that I want to have near me. And now, next to that t-shirt, is a little urn with Dad's ashes in it. Dad loved travel almost as much as he loved music, and that's how we ended up at the New Orleans Jazz Fest. Mom and Dad went every other year for a decade, and finally, in 2014, I got to join them. And Mom and Dad and my sister Josie, they drove from here all the way to New Orleans, making the obligatory pit stop in Biloxi, Mississippi, at the Shed Barbecue and Blues joint. This place was special and one of my dad's most favorite places in the world. The next day, I flew into Louis Armstrong International Airport, and that's when the fun began. Dad had mapped out every single street corner that he wanted me to see a performer on, every single Sazerac that he wanted me to drink, every bowl of shrimp and grits that he wanted me to eat. He planned the perfect way to show me the city of music that he loved, that he considered a second home. That Saturday at the festival, it was pouring rain. And Dad and I, just the two of us, we huddled underneath this clear plastic bag. And we listened as the rain fell on our faces to this amazing James Brown tribute band. And they played Sex Machine, and it was just like we were at Kobo in 1970. It was amazing. And I looked over at Dad, and he looked at me, and he had this smile that was as big as any smile I had ever seen him have. And just 30 minutes into this festival, this live music had given him life, and we were there together. The next 2 days were spent with the gospel tent, the jazz tent, the blues tent, seeing gospel choirs that you can only see in churches in New Orleans, seeing Mardi Gras Indians, hearing the Prema brass band, and again, hearing Jimmy Buffett, who we had heard for the first time together back at Pine Knob when my mom was pregnant with my sister. That time there, those 2 days at Jazz Fest were transformative. He died just a few weeks later, and I was so glad that I got to experience that with him. And this year, Mom and Josie and I, we decided that we were finally ready to go to Jazz Fest. So we drove from here to Detroit, or from Detroit to New Orleans, and we stopped in Biloxi, Mississippi. And we stopped at the Shed, this place that I had heard so much about but had never been. And as we pulled in, I could smell the barbecue. And I could hear the blues. And we parked the car, we ate our plates. And we went over to the river behind the Shed. And we took out that urn that lives underneath my bed, and we put some of Dad's ashes in the river. And as we were leaving, we saw the owner, and we let him know what we had done, and he looked at us and he said, "The river was blessed today." We move from the backyard to that front porch, to that wicker love seat that had become a shrine in those last 2 days. All of his best friends, all of his family, all of our best friends together celebrating his life. Aaron, my best friend's husband, who had in himself become one of Dad's closest friends, goes inside and grabs the old man's ukulele off the wall. Gary, he pulls his guitar out, and they together play song after song from bands that they would have heard at the Grandie. I request The Wait by the band, and I pull out my phone and I hit record. Everybody takes a deep breath, and everybody joins in. Take a load off Fanny. Take a load for free. Take a load off Fanny and put that load right on me. The love on that porch is palpable. After we're done, I hit play to listen to the recording, and there's nothing there. 5 minutes recorded of complete silence, even though the phone was sitting right in front of us. There was only one explanation for that. Dad. He always said there was nothing like a live show. We didn't need a recording. We were there. This fall, my partner and I are going to see the MC5 play their 50th anniversary show at the Shelter here in downtown Detroit. And I'm going to take some of Dad's ashes with us because I know he would not want to miss that show. Thank you.
Patty Wheeler, ladies and gentlemen.